As you hear, the meeting's going to be recorded for future use. We have two wonderful presenters from our community corrections side of the house at the Office of Probation and Correctional Alternatives, and I will have them introduce themselves. My name is Nicole Aldi. I am the manager of the Alternatives to Incarceration unit here at OPCA, and we really thank you all for joining, and I'm loving the mixed group of individuals we have here, lots of probation and community corrections, other community corrections professionals. So without further ado, Frank and Darcy, take it away.
Thank you, Nicole. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our second DCJS Lunch and Learn webinar. This one is focusing on case plans. Again, as Nicole said, it is being recorded. And just as a reminder, if everyone could please make sure that you keep yourselves on mute, just so that we don't have any echoes or feedbacks, that would be great. Feel free to use the chat feature. If you have any questions or comments at any point during the presentation, go ahead and throw those in the chat. And if we don't get to them right away, we will have some time at the end for some questions and answers. And we will be sure to go through the chat at the end. I just want to introduce myself. I am Darcy Katz-Mara. I'm a Community Correction Representative 2 here with the Office of Probation and Correctional Alternatives. I am in the Alternative to Incarceration unit. And prior to joining OPCA, I spent about 18 years with the Albany County Probation Department. And I'm really excited to be here today. I'm going to turn it over to my counterpart, Frank, to introduce himself.
Thank you very much, Darcy. Hello, everyone. My name is Frank Cangiano. I am also a Community Correction Representative 2 with the Office of Probation and Correctional Alternatives. I currently work in the Vocational Education, Employment, and Reentry Unit at OPCA. And I have 13 years of experience as a probation officer with the Albany County Probation Department. And I am also the Workforce Development Specialist Training Program Manager here at OPCA. Thank you all very much for coming to today's webinar.
Great, thank you, Frank. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about case planning. And case planning is something that whether you're coming to us with probation or a workforce program or any one of our many community corrections programs, case planning is something that's really at the heart of what we all do. So just a few learning objectives for today. By the end of this lunchtime, you will be able to identify the purpose of a case plan. Participants will be able to identify the characteristics of a well-written goal. Participants will be able to identify strategies that can be used to strengthen motivation and client commitment when you're developing a case plan or when you're working towards achieving those goals set forth in your case plans. And you will be able to describe the circumstances that might warrant an update or a modification to a case plan. The title of today's webinar is Case Plans, a Living Document, and it is important to remember that there are times that we're going to need to update or modify those case plans, and Frank is going to talk to you about those. So let's start a little bit talking about why we case plan. A lot of people tend to think about case planning and case management as sort of the same, but our case plan is really what provides a structure to our case management techniques and strategies. Case plans help us keep things on task so that when we're meeting with our clients or participants, if you're working from that case plan, you're going to know exactly what purpose each of your meetings has. Every item that you discuss with your client is going to be relevant to the issues that are going on in their lives. Case plans include goals, right? So these goals help us focus our attention and our case management and help us address the problems and the criminogenic needs that are identified in maybe your risk assessment tool. Every meeting that you have with your client or your participant should really be reviewing each of these goals and how we're working towards that. So it provides a structure. Case plans also, importantly, help us maintain documentation. I think a lot of us we're really great about our case management strategies. Your case plan is what gives documentation to all of that really great work that you do in your case management. This is going to be how you demonstrate that you're working within the program model and making sure that you are delivering your services with fidelity and the way that they're intended to be delivered. Case plans help us identify expectations for all parties. Case planning is not a one-way street. And we're going to talk a lot today about how your case planning should really be a collaborative effort. This isn't you as the community corrections professional sitting down at your desk and writing out a case plan with no input. This is something that needs to happen between you and your client. And your case plan identifies what the expectations are. There are expectations for what your client needs to do to reach some of these goals, but they're not doing that on their own. There's also expectations for what you as the professional need to do to help them realize those goals. These case plans help us guide our decision making. You know, we all know that at every turn, there's a decision to be made. And if we're going back to these case plans and reminding ourselves what our goals are and what we're working for and working towards, it's going to help us guide our decision making. And that's true for both you as the professional and for your client. And really importantly, our case plans help us measure progress. You are going to be able to look at your case plan and you're going to be able to accurately say whether or not your participant is making progress towards reaching those goals. When we know if they're making progress, we know if we need to maybe modify that case plan. And modifying the case plan can really help enhance their ability and opportunity to be successful. Whereas if you're finding that your case plan, when you're measuring progress, if you're finding that those strategies are not working and we're not making progress towards our goals, we know that that can create a lot of frustration. And if those strategies aren't working and we're having building frustration, we need to take a step back and say, okay, we're not making progress here. Maybe let's look at how we can modify this case plan to give us a better opportunity to be successful. So case plans can go by a lot of different terms, a lot of different names, depending on what program you're coming from, what your program model is. Some of the different terms that we see is service coordination plans or service plans, treatment plans, employment retention programs for those of you in employment-focused programs, maybe change plans or action plans. If your program uses any other different terminology, we would go ahead and throw that in the chat for us. We would love to see what some of the other terminology that programs use for your case plans. But the important thing here is that even though we might call them different things, they all have the same underlying philosophy. It's the same philosophy about how we create our case plans, what informs our case plans. Excuse me. That philosophy should be consistent across different program models. Let me see. I see in the chat that Veronica said that you call your case plans individual service plans. That's great. Thank you, Veronica. So what do we use to inform our case plan? What do we use to really develop those goals and action steps? I like to think of a case plan as a roadmap. So your case management is your road trip, right? And your case plan is your roadmap for how you're going to get from point A to point B. And so what do we use to develop that roadmap? One of the biggest things that we are going to use is our risk and needs assessment. Case planning it's not a cookie cutter process, right? And that's important for us to remember. So you're going to find maybe with our populations that a lot of people have similar needs, but they're not, all their life circumstances are not the same. And so all of those goals shouldn't be cookie cutter goals across your caseload. Your goals should be worded differently and reflective of what is going on in that particular client's life. Our risk assessment results give us target areas. They give us really important information regarding the criminogenic needs. And what are our criminogenic needs? These are the beliefs and behaviors that drive criminality. So this is where we need to target our interventions. Aside from that risk and need assessment result, we also have court orders. Many of us have court orders that we're dealing with. And with court orders come mandates that need to be met. We need to make sure, as an example, if the court prescribes an anger management program on order and conditions of probation, we need to make sure that that mandate is going to be met. And so that needs to be a part of our case planning. Oftentimes, those court-ordered mandates will reflect back to one of the needs areas, one of those criminogenic needs areas that is identified with your risk assessment. Individuals also have protective factors. And what I mean by protective factors, for those of you that aren't familiar with that term, is these are the strengths in a person's life that really help to mitigate some of those risk factors. They may have access to a really great sober support network. And so when we're making our case plan and developing our case plan, we want to utilize those protective factors. We want to utilize that sober support network. And so some of our goals and action steps might focus on utilizing those strengths and supports and services that are already present in your client's life. And then we're also going to prioritize our client needs. I said before that this should really be a collaborative effort. This is something, when you're developing your case plan, you should be sitting down with your client and saying, what is it that you feel? Let's look at these things. Let's look at your protective factors. Let's look at your court-ordered mandates. Let's look at your needs and your risk and needs assessment results and see the areas that are identified where you might need a little assistance. And what do you feel is important in your life at this point? Because if this is a collaborative effort, that's where you're going to get buy-in. And that's really important for motivating and getting commitment from your clients. I don't want to spend a lot of time here, but I'm going to take you back to Psych 101 a little bit. I think probably a lot of us had to take Psych 101 at some point. Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And Maslow's hierarchy of needs talks about the basic needs that we as human beings have that motivate our behavior. And Maslow said that we all have certain physiological needs. Okay, these are the needs things that we need for basic human survival. And we can't attend to some of these higher level needs in the pyramid if those basic physiological needs are not met. And this includes things like clothing, sleep, shelter, food, water, right? These are the basic things that all of us need for survival. But the reality for some of our clients is that those needs are not met. How often do we work with somebody who is experiencing homelessness or doesn't know where their next meal is going to come from? So it's really important that we recognize that until some of those needs are met, they're not going to be able to attend to some of those higher level goals that we may have for them. So we need to take that into account when we're case planning. Those needs are very often in our field referred to as stabilization needs. So again, it's our housing, acute medical or mental health care. If someone's in acute physical or psychological distress, they're not likely going to be able to address some of those other goals and needs that we eventually want to work towards with them. Again, food sources. Those are things that people can't focus on higher level needs without those being met. We also have issues with transportation, childcare, identification. These are things that you guys as community corrections professionals are constantly pointing out that are barriers for people. And so sometimes we need to start small on our goal setting and address some of those basic issues. And once some of those stabilization needs are met, we can move forward a little bit to criminogenic needs. These are the needs that are identified in those risk and needs assessments that we do. A lot of programs will use like the LSIR or the NY Compass, and they identify the criminogenic needs of our clients. And these are what are known as the central 8 criminogenic needs. And the first of those is a history of antisocial behavior. Okay, this is looking at our onset of criminal and antisocial behavior and what that criminal history looks like. An antisocial personality pattern. This refers to things like impulsivity, aggression, lack of remorse. Your antisocial cognitions, these are really your maladaptive thought patterns that contribute to criminality. Antisocial associates, that's your peer group. And when a person has a high needs area with antisocial associates, it tends to mean that most of their peer associations are also involved in antisocial behavior. Family or marital problems, this is really conflictual relationships within the family or with your spouse or significant other. High criminogenic needs in the areas of school or work points to poor performance or retention history, low satisfaction in their school or work domain. And then leisure or recreation, this refers to a person's interests, hobbies, activities, and whether or not they lie in pro-social or antisocial realm. And finally, substance abuse. And this refers to our use of drugs and alcohol. And so those criminogenic needs are often what are going to translate into our goal statements that Frank is going to talk to you about. But it's important to remember that when you go through your risk and need assessment and you come out with these results, this isn't secret information. This is something that you should be sitting down and reviewing with your client as a means of collaborating to make this case plan. Their needs shouldn't be a secret to them. Now, moving forward a little bit into the phases of case planning, there's sort of 3 phases that we look at when it comes to case planning. And each phase incorporates different tools and strategies that have demonstrated promise in correctional settings. And this is across both juvenile and adult populations. And the first of those stages is mapping. This phase is about engagement and discovery. When we start mapping for our case planning, we're going to review the file information and the collateral information. We're going to give ourselves some background on who this person is. And then we're going to work to engage with that person. We need to build a rapport. Again, this is a collaborative process. You need to work together on it. And in order to work together with your client, you need to build rapport with them. We are going to, this is where we administer and review our assessments and review those results, as I just said. And then we're going to start to select different priorities and targets that we want to work on. This is where we're mapping sort of the stops that we need to make on our roadmap. And we're going to collaborate with referral sources. Now, referral sources could be formal services. It could also be family supports, employment sources. So we need to collaborate with those different sources in this mapping stage. Mapping is going to allow you to get a really comprehensive picture of who the individual is, including their challenges, their protective factors, and you should have a good idea of where their incentive lies for change. Our second phase of case planning is really the planning stage. The planning stage is about building motivation to change. Remember that that's what our case plan is about. That's what our case management is really working to get people from point A to point B. So in our planning stage, we need to look at focusing their attention and getting feedback on selecting where we want to start. Frank is going to talk to you about how we select the goals that we're going to start working on. And that's part of this planning phase. Then we need to write goal statements and action steps. And our goal statements are, we have long-term and short-term goals, and then we have action steps on and those action steps are like the short pieces of how we're going to get from point A to point B in that goal statement. Frank is going to discuss with you how to write out good, solid action steps and goals. And then we're going to use those goals and action steps to fully develop our case plan. This allows us to prioritize what our targets are going to be and increase motivation on our client's part to work with us to get to that end goal. And the third phase of case planning is an ongoing effort. Okay, case planning is about constantly reviewing your case plan. You need to constantly re-engage and reassess our goals and our work and our progress. You need to review that case plan. Oftentimes our programs will have certain points at which case plans need to be reviewed. That may be 3 months, 6 months, depending on what your program model says. But you need to be able to review that case plan, look for the progress. And we need to affirm that progress. There's not always a lot of positive reinforcement that goes on in some of our clients' lives. And so being able to point out the progress that they have made, that maybe those action steps that they were able to complete, or a short-term goal that they were able to realize. That positive reinforcement really helps us in building that motivation. Reviewing helps us mobilize and helps us work with our clients to build their executive functioning skills. Those are those decision-making skills, their ability to identify and access resources and services that help move them forward. And then updating that plan. As I said, this is titled a living document. Those case plans are going to need modifications and updates. Life changes, and we need to be able to review the plan on a regular basis to make sure that what we're working towards is still relevant in someone's life. I'm going to turn it over to Frank now. He's going to talk to you about goal setting and writing some of those goals and action steps.
Thank you very much, Darcy, and really great job in kind of laying out the framework of what case planning really needs to be. So before we can talk about long-term, short-term goals and action steps, we really have to define what a goal is, right? So a goal is an outcome that a person envisions for the future and that he or she plans and commits to achieve. So once your participant has selected a priority for change, you can then work with him or her to goal and to develop really small steps for that participant to achieve those goals. And generally speaking, when we talk about long-term goals, these should be goals that are achievable by the end of your programming with somebody or even beyond. When we think about short-term goals in writing short-term goals, in general, these are goals that can realistically be achieved from reassessment to reassessment. So when you do those periodic reassessments of a case, however often you do that as part of your programming or if someone's on probation, those are what those short-term goals are. And action steps are really much smaller. These action steps are achievable from one participant contact to the next. So these could be steps that can be achieved from office visit to office visit as you're working with a participant. The goals should be valued by the participant and individualized. So if you have two different participants that have challenges in the same domain area, in the same need area, the goal statement should still be different because when we really drill down into their lives, we often find that what each individual values is quite different from another. Goals should also reflect an outcome rather than continuing to focus on a completion of a service. There is a tendency by many professionals to write goal statements that equate outcomes with the completion of a formal service. Of course, formal services can be used as a step or strategy to assist participants to address the problem. However, participants in a service does not guarantee goal attainment. Goals may be met by formal services, and they also may be met in a number of other ways. So thinking beyond services can help us to develop more effective and dynamic goals. And these are just some tips, some guidance on best practices on how you can think about or what you can think about when you're writing out these goals. And one of them is a rule of three. So when you're meeting with a participant after an assessment is completed and you have all their information, you really should be speaking to them in that first goal area about the first goal area being the choice of the client and what they would like to work on from the list of areas identified in the assessment. The case plan should be collaborative, and having the first choice to go to the client often assists in the buy-in of working on the case plan and goals. And I'm just doing a formal check-in with Darcy if she can hear me okay. Just give me a thumbs up if you can. Okay, very good. The second goal area should be an area that is mandated to be addressed by either the court or the referring agency. So as Darcy said, participants have court mandates to have conditions of probation or parole perhaps. So that second goal area that's trying to work on with them should be or can be focused on those mandates. And the third goal area should be something that both the client and the program professional agree upon. So that third goal area could be something that's agreed upon mutually by both of you to work on during their progress with your program. Sometimes individual choice and sometimes mandates might align with each other. Sometimes they may not. but you should remember that they don't necessarily have to be distinct from one another. So certainly keep that in mind as you're working on figuring out goals with a client or participant. You've all taken trainings before with DCJS, OPCA, and probably other corrections agencies, so you've all seen this acronym before. And this is the SMART goal acronym: specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely. So these are how your short-term goals and more so your action steps should be written out. They should be specific, meaning that the goal and action steps are specifically when working with the client to clarify an outcome, and they should be measurable. So that means you and the participants should be able to clearly envision what changes will be taking place. And you also have to consider behaviors that can be seen and or heard, and that can also be closely monitored if you are working with a client or supervising a client on your caseload. They should also be attainable. So the goals and the action steps should be something that the participant can achieve. They should also be realistic. These goals and action steps should be within the participant's control to be able to change. And they should be timely, meaning that when you're developing these goals, when you're writing out these goals and action steps can be achieved within a relatively short period of time. So these are the 5 components of how an effective goal can be written. Darcy and I keep speaking about action steps. So when we speak about action steps are defined as and can be envisioned as really those smaller components of a goal. So simply stated, action steps, when achieved, will be able to help the client get to or reach their goal. For example, if a client has never successfully maintained sobriety for longer than a few days, they might consider a series of action steps that lead to this ultimate outcome. Depending on his or her situation, the first step might be to identify or become aware of resources that can help with his or her sobriety. Another step might be to learn personal strategies to manage those cravings and urges. Breaking the goal into action steps that are easily attainable will help increase your client's confidence and help to boost their motivation. So thinking about action steps, we can also think of them in this way. We could think of them as meeting one of 3 criteria, whether it could be a strategy, it could be a support, or it could be a service. So an action step in regards to a strategy really can include those skills, talents, abilities, attitudes within the individual to help promote a healthy alternative to antisocial or criminal behavior. When we think about supports, we are really thinking about those natural supports that an individual has, which includes family members, friends, perhaps mentors, neighbors, and other individuals who play a positive role in the client's life. And when we think about services, we are really referring to those formal resources, referring to programs or services that are designed to focus on reducing risk and or improving the well-being of the individual in specific areas. So when you're thinking about developing these action steps, you should think about them in a way of strategies, supports, and services as a way to help divide them out. Some more tips developing these smaller action steps is you have to consider all factors, right? This is actually a tool that was developed by Edward de Bono. He was a researcher. It is designed to encourage the participant to consider all aspects of a goal. So what you're doing with the participant is you're merely brainstorming tasks that need to be addressed to achieve a goal, and then you're prioritizing them. You're having that conversation with a client about which aspect of the goal is a priority right now. And then you can assign the participant a new task after every session. Remembering that action steps are steps that can be taken from office contact to office contact as you work with the participant. There's also another tip to develop an action plan called looking for exceptions. So this means, or as an example, this might mean asking the participant to reflect on a time when he or she was successful, even partially successful, at meeting an agreed upon goal. And then you'll review these strategies attempted previously by the participant. So you might ask questions like, what have you tried before? You will then identify experiences of successes and failure. And you'll also talk about the outcome of past attempts by the participant. And then you'll talk with them about what should be continued, what should be discontinued as far as their behavior. And after having a conversation like this, after asking these questions, you can certainly list useful and effective strategies that the participant did in the past as action steps within the case plan. And then also you can explore barriers and brainstorming solutions. So nothing really groundbreaking about this particular tip. You're simply just looking at the barriers that got in the way of previous attempts or previous steps the participant took to make positive change. And then you're brainstorming solutions, you're brainstorming perhaps new resources that can help this individual with future positive change. So here on this slide, an example of goals and action steps. So we have this example of John, and John has a long-standing history of alcohol and substance abuse. So John's long-term goal will be to maintain sobriety, remembering that the long-term goal can be a goal that's completed by the end of programming or beyond. And a short-term goal for John could be that he will be involved in a substance abuse treatment program. And then you can see that the two action steps that belong to the long-term and short-term goal really dig down into steps John can take, office contact to office contact, to be able to help address the behavior that you're trying to change in a positive manner. So this is just one example of goals and action steps, and this is John. And this next example is Frank. So Frank is unable to maintain employment. So Frank's long-term goal is to obtain work in the computer repair field. And his short-term goal is to enroll in a computer repair training program or programs. So these action steps, as you can see, also really dig down into the steps Frank can take to reach his ultimate goal. So one of them is Frank will work with staff to research computer repair programs from 3 local community colleges or vocational programs prior to March 15th, 2023, so 2 weeks from now. And the second action step, and this can be assigned to Frank on 3/15 when you meet with him next, is that Frank will apply to 1 computer repair training program in local community prior to 3/29/23. So you're really seeing how these action steps can be broken down office contact to office contact to help both John and Frank out and to promote positive change. So how do we strengthen motivation and commitment, right? So we're talking with the client. We think we have a great plan with them, but they're simply not motivated or committed to um, addressing their case plan, working with you in the case planning process. So one of the techniques that I'm sure many of you have been trained on is motivational interviewing. So can you put in the chat either yes or no if you received at the minimum the basic motivational interviewing 2-day training? Just say yes or no.
I'm seeing all yeses so far, Frank.
I know this is great to see. Great to see. And that was based on a closed-ended question I just asked the audience. So yes, very good. So since all of you have been trained, or it looks like most of you have been trained in basic motivational interviewing, utilize that skill set. Utilize the skills that you learned in that training to help strengthen someone's motivation and commitment to a case plan. And one of the techniques that's a pretty kind of simple technique to use is what's called scaling questions. And that was something that we all learned in basic motivational interviewing training, but it can just be used simply during a structured interview. So you would ask a scaling question to an individual. For example, on a scale of 1 to 10, how important is it to you to maintain sobriety? And then on that scale, someone might say it's a 3 out of 10, it's a 7 out of 10. And then you would ask that person, well, if you wrote down it's a 3 out of 10, so how come you didn't write down a 1 out of 10? And then you would help build that conversation with the individual. Well, this is important to me, that is important to me. So the use of scaling questions can really help build that motivation and commitment. And the rule of 3, which I mentioned earlier, can allow a client to identify one goal they want to work on, really breaking down those goals. It also allows the client themselves, with that first rule of 3, to choose a starting point for change, remembering that that first goal area should be the client's individual choice. So it's allowing that client to choose a starting point for change. And the term that many, if not all of us, have learned in basic motivational interviewing is that mutual alliance. So it's a shared responsibility between you as a professional and the client to help build that change. It's a living document, a case plan. So when and why we modify, when and why we update. We would update, generally speaking, if unsuccessful at achieving certain tasks. You would then address the barriers and perhaps add new action steps as an update to a case plan. Another reason for why we would modify or update a case plan is if stabilization needs arise. And then these should take precedence. So for example, if someone's trying to work with you on a case plan, develop goals with you, they're working to achieve education or employment, and they suddenly become homeless, right? They suddenly lose their housing. It's a stabilization need that has arisen. So you would have to modify, update that case plan to help them reach their goal of having more permanent housing or being able to do that. And just overall circumstances change, right? I mean, we all live in the real world. We have all received phone calls from clients. Emergencies happen, circumstances change. So something like that, like losing a job or a relapse, can certainly also be a reason for updating a case plan. So updating a case plan, let's look at John again. So John, if you can remember, wasn't involved in substance abuse treatment. He was attending it just fine. And then all of a sudden, John relapsed on heroin. So as you can see from this modified or updated case plan for John, the long-term goal still remains the same. The short-term goal still remains the same, but perhaps the action step in this example might change. The action step might be that John will enter an inpatient treatment program within 2 weeks. Very simply stated. In the case of Frank, remember that Frank wanted to go into computer repair training as an employment option. Frank started to attend this computer training program, but then said to his PO that the field just wasn't for him. He thought it was too complicated. He thought it was beyond his abilities. So he just didn't have any further motivation or commitment. But Frank did talk with you about perhaps entering employment or work in the warehouse field. So Frank's behavior still is the same. He's unable to maintain employment. However, Frank's long-term, short-term, and action steps all change. So now the long-term goal for Frank is to obtain employment in a warehouse position. Short-term goal being he will apply for work in the warehouse field. And the action step that belongs here prior to the next office visit is that Frank will identify 2 local warehouses in the Albany County area to talk with you about in his search for employment. These are just 2 very simple examples of one, a case plan at the start, and 2, how a case plan can be updated. And one more thing I want to say before we turn it over to you as an audience for questions or comments. These goals all relate to one another, but they are not the same. They're not worded the same. They're broken down into more realistic steps. So a long-term goal, short-term goal, and action steps should not be worded the same. It should really be broken down from the long-term goal, short-term goal, all the way down to the action steps, breaking that goal down to more realistic steps for the person to complete. So at this time, we would like to open the discussion up for any questions or comments. You may either raise your hand to indicate you would like to speak or place the question in the chat. I didn't see many questions or any questions, quite honestly, come in while we were presenting. But if anyone has any questions or comments, please feel free. Just wait a couple of minutes for people to chat anything or say anything or raise their hand.
Hello, it's Connie Johnson. How are you?
Hi, Connie. How are you doing today?
I'm well, thank you. Happy Wednesday to everyone. So the
Happy
question
Wednesday.
is, thank you, would we be able to get a copy of this content?
Yes, a copy of the recording will be made available on the Integrated Justice Portal. And we should be able to send out this as a PDF document to everyone here who was in attendance.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Have a good one.
Thank you. Nice to see you again.
Yes, always. Thank you.
And then Darcy, I didn't know, I think you may have wanted to say something about the work that's being done and how it is or is not reflected in the case plan. So I didn't know if you wanted to speak on that a little bit as well.
Yeah, so just as as a little bit of a reminder to you guys, when Frank and I were going through all of this, I kept saying to him, the thing is, I really think everyone does case planning, right? You have to case plan in order to case manage. But I think so many of us tend to do it more in our heads and less so on paper. And it's so important for you guys to write down and plan this out and map this out on paper, because it's really what it gives you more structure to your case management, and it gives you credit for all the really great work that you're doing. So just please remember to put the work into your physical case plan, the same work and passion that you put into your case management, put that into your case planning, because it's going to be really reflective of all of the important things that you guys do with your clients and your participants. So make sure you're giving yourselves credit for that. And also, I think you're going to find that when it's well written out and it's done in collaboration with your clients, that it's going to help guide you even more than when you're going with what's in your head.
Yeah, agreed, Darcy. And we know a lot of great work is being done in the field when it comes to individuals. We see it in our conversations with programs, with departments. But even in my talks with the programs that I oversee, I've even been told that the case progress is being documented in the notes, but not necessarily updated in the case plan itself even. even that's a factor as well. That the case plan itself has to be updated so you can really show the progress that you're making with a person, and you can show them the progress that they're making when they're trying to achieve those goals. I see that Nicole Aldi has in the chat, and I'm going to ask this to everyone here, maybe as a yes or no response. Do you and your programs have an electronic case management program or software that you use? Maybe as a yes or no response, you could let us know. Yeah, I think Nicole was looking for is an electronic case management system.
Looks like a lot of yeses, a couple no's in there. A couple programs that are recently developing a system.
That's really great to
Yeah,
hear because it's important. These systems help with keeping it constant in your face to be able to go and update the case plans. Pen and paper is great if that's what you have to use, and we encourage that, but oftentimes if it's not as readily available to update as an electronic software case management. So that's great to hear. Thank you.
All right.
Yeah, I'm not
go
seeing
ahead.
any real. Yeah, I'm not really seeing any raised hands or any other chatted questions. So, it sounds like people were vested in this webinar. We wanted to thank you all for signing on, for staying on for this lunch and learn on case plans living document. We hope that you found this information to be valuable and applicable to your everyday work. So please tune in to our next Lunch and Learn webinar in this series scheduled for Wednesday, April 5th, 2023, to discuss what is procedural justice. So if interested in receiving any additional trainings, either on this topic or any other criminal justice related topic that you have an interest in, please feel free to reach out to your OPCA representative, and we'll hopefully point you in the right direction. Thank you all very much. Take care.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.